Write, of course, beautiful books and poetry, and so many of us likewise continue to do that. We're doing great things, and before I forget, I wanted to mention a couple of things. Rudy Garcia is here. He's my comrade. He's sitting at this table over here. Actually, it was Rudy and I who started La Flor. And so Rudy is one of the founders of that blog that I hope you are all familiar with. And if not, you should check us out at labloga.blogspot.com. And if you ever have any news or information about what you're doing in your library or in your school or with writers or you're a writer yourself, send it to us. And we love to put that information out there because we see that as part of this struggle. And we need to get the news out there. We need to let people know what is happening. Now there are different views of being a writer in general, much less being a writer of color. And some of these we've heard before. We're familiar with the sportscaster Red Smith's comment that writing really is easy. You know, all you do is sit down at a typewriter and open up a vein. Or Ernest Hemingway said, I have to write to be happy, whether I get paid for it or not. But it is a hell of a disease to be born with. I like to do it, which is even worse. That makes it from a disease to a vice. And then the wonderful author Sandra Cisneros says that instead of writing by inspiration, she and other Chicana writers write by obsession of that which is violently tugging at our psyche. And you get the drift here, right? A writer has to write. And it doesn't matter if you get published every week or you never get published. What you have to do is write. And if you're Hemingway, it's a disease. If you're Sandra Cisneros, it's an obsession. If you're Red Smith, it's like opening up your heart and letting the blood flow. But you still do it. And that certainly describes me. I was writing before I was published. And if I never publish another word, I'll still be writing. You know, I try to write every day. Although I used to tell people I wrote 3 pages every day. That was a lie. but it sounds good. And people have to realize I'm a fiction writer. So you really can't trust what I say. So let's talk about what's going on with Latino writers. Did you know there's Chicano science fiction? There's Chicano fantasy, there's Chicalín, there's mysteries, of course, there's mainstream, there's poetry. And I think an easier question is, well, what isn't there that's Latino or Latina? Well, nothing really. When I taught my class of Chicano literature, and we talked about Chicano novels, we talked about what it really meant to be a Chicano writer, and we debated at a very high level the aesthetics of this kind of writing. You know what we concluded, so my students and I, is that the definition for this kind of writing changes every time somebody publishes something new. It just goes on and on. We're not a static people, and our art and our culture are not static. And what was wonderful in the 1970s is still wonderful today, but that's not 2011. And we've got new writers and invigorating writers and exciting writers that are doing more and different things. We recognize some of the greats and the founding people of this type of art. Tomás Rivera, Rolando Hinojosa, Rodolfo Olaya, And I think then right after that, wonderful people like Pat Mora, who spoke yesterday, Graciela Limon. And yet today, we have other wonderful writers who have taken on the topics of this century, including immigration. Reina Grande, wonderful writer, and has now put out at least 2 novels.
Yes.
And other essays. Melinda Palacio, who has a brand new novel, her first novel, a debut novel. She's a poet. Her new novel deals with the immigration raids in Chandler, Arizona in the 1990s, and that's the backdrop for her fiction. And she's just published that. She's actually touring now and promoting that book, so if you get a chance to see Melinda. Melinda also writes for La Bloga. She actually trades with me on Fridays, so I do every other Friday, and Melinda is there when I'm not. So I guess all I'm saying here at this point is, we define ourselves sometimes too narrowly, and we tend to, some of the writers tend to limit our audience by what we say we're doing. Alfredo Vea, are you familiar with Alfredo Vea's works? A wonderful novelist from San Francisco. Truly one of the most brilliant men I've ever met. And Alfredo has written at least 4 novels. Gods Go Begging was his last one, but he also did La Maravilla. Alfredo once said that, he knew he was a Chicano writer, and he would always be a Chicano writer, but he didn't want to be known as a Chicano writer. He's a writer, and he would never attempt to limit his audience. That was his phrase, narrow his audience by putting himself into a box from which he couldn't escape. And I think all we have to do today is look at the wide variety, the diversity of what's being produced by our artists and our cultural warriors to know that that is very true, very true. So anyhow, I started writing because I love to read. And I'm not saying this just because you're librarians, but when I was a boy in Florence, Colorado, which is a small town to the south of us, I grew up in this town that had 3,000 people. And it always had 3,000 people. It never failed. From one year to the next, the official population was 3,000 people. I grew up in that town that had a library that literally could fit in this room, right? The building. Half of this room would be the building for the library. But when I discovered that place, well, then I discovered the world. I spent too many hours in the bowling alley and then too many hours in the library. That was my life. I was kind of split up between those 2 places. The experience of finding a book that transported me on an adventure that freed me was overwhelming. And so I tried to read everything that that librarian would let me read in that building. And after she got to know me, she gave me books that maybe I was a little too young for at the time, but I was reading it and I was loving it. And that's when I knew that I wanted to do the same thing. I wanted to be able to create something that would transport people somewhere else, or give them some ideas, or make them think. And that might have been arrogant on my part, but if you don't have a little bit of that, you can't be a writer. You need to be able to say, I've got something that I need to say or write, and I'm going to put it out there, and you're going to love it. And if you can't say that about your work, then you probably shouldn't do it. Anyhow, that library was the first in many stages to the development of myself as a writer. And I started writing at a very young age character sketches of my family. My uncle, my crazy uncles,